What is communism? Communism is a political, social, and economic ideology that advocates the replacement of private ownership and profit-based economies with a classless economic system under which the means of production, such as buildings, machinery, tools, and labor, are communally owned, with private ownership of property either prohibited or severely limited by the state. Because of its opposition to both democracy and capitalism, communism is considered by its advocates to be an advanced form of socialism. Brief historical sketch of contemporary communism. Contemporary communism was inspired in Western Europe by the Industrial Revolution of the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The revolution, which allowed some to attain great wealth at the expense of an increasingly impoverished working class, encouraged Karl Marx to conclude that class struggles resulting from income inequality would inevitably give rise to a society where the means of production are owned by all, resulting in prosperity to be shared by all. In 1848, Marx, along with German economist Friedrich Engels, wrote the Communist Manifesto, in which they concluded that the problems of poverty, disease, and shortened lives that afflicted the proletariat, that is, the working class, could be resolved only by replacing capitalism with communism. Under communism, as envisioned by Marx and Engels, the major means of industrial production, such as factories, mills, mines, and railroads, would be publicly owned and operated for the benefit of all. In fact, in the famous Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels outlined the following as characteristics of communism. 1. Abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. 2. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. 3. Abolition of all right of inheritance. 4. Confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. 5. Equal liability of all to labor, and establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. 6. The gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country. 7. Free education for all children in public schools and abolition of children's factory labor. 8. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state. 9. The state would control communication and transportation. And 10. The state factories and instruments of production would cultivate wastelands and improve the soil. Marx predicted that a fully realized form of communism following the overthrow of capitalism would result in a communal society free of class divisions or government, in which the production and distribution of goods would be based upon the principle, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. During the Second World War, the Soviet Union joined with other European communist and socialist regimes in fighting the fascist threat posed by Nazi Germany. However, the end of the war also ended the always shaky alliance between the Soviet Union and its more politically moderate Warsaw Pact satellite countries, allowing the USSR to establish communist regimes across Eastern Europe. As is well known, the Russian Revolution of 1917 led to the formation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics under Vladimir Lenin in 1922. By the 1930s, Lenin's brand of moderate communism had been replaced by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which under Joseph Stalin exerted absolute government control over all aspects of the Russian society. Despite the incalculable human cost of his iron-fisted, authoritarian application of communism, Stalin transformed the Soviet Union from a backward country into a world superpower. After the Second World War, the political tensions of the Cold War and the economic strain of maintaining its status as a global military superpower slowly weakened the Soviet Union's grip over its Eastern Bloc communist satellite nations, such as East Germany and Poland. By the 1990s, the prevalence of communism as a global political force quickly diminished. Today, only China, Cuba, North Korea, Laos, and Vietnam continue to function as communist states. Key principles of contemporary communism. While the most widely recognized communist countries, such as the Soviet Union, China, and Yugoslavia, developed their own models which varied from each other over time. 6 defining characteristics of pure communist ideology are often identified, namely: 1. Collective ownership of the means of production. 2. Abolition of private property. 3. Democratic centralism. 4. Centrally planned economy. 5. Elimination of income inequality. And 6. Repression. To the first, that is, on collective ownership of the means of production. This implies that all means of production such as factories, farms, land, mines, and transportation, and communication systems are owned and controlled by the state. Second, on the abolition of private property. As collective ownership implies, private ownership of means of production is prohibited. In a purely communist state, individual citizens are allowed to own nothing except the necessities of life. The operation of privately owned businesses is similarly prohibited. Third, on democratic centralism. Democratic centralism is usually the official organizing and decision-making principle of communist parties. Democratic centralism refers to a practice in which political decisions, while reached by a nominally democratic voting process, are binding on all members of the party. As conceived by Lenin, democratic centralism allows party members to participate in political discussion and state opinions, but compels them to follow the Communist Party line once a decision has been made. Fourth, on the centrally planned economy. Also known as a command economy, a centrally planned economy is an economic system in which a single central authority, typically the government in communist states, makes all decisions regarding the manufacturing and the distribution of products. Centrally planned economies are different from free market economies, such as those in capitalist countries, in which such decisions are made by businesses and consumers according to the factors of supply and demand. Fifth, on the elimination of income inequality. In theory, by compensating each individual according to their need, gaps in income are eliminated. By abolishing revenue, interest income, profit, income inequality, and socioeconomic class friction is eliminated, and the distribution of wealth is accomplished on a just and fair basis. And sixth, on repression. In keeping with the principle of democratic centralism, political opposition and economic freedom are prohibited or repressed. Other basic individual rights and freedoms may also be repressed. Historically, communist states, such as the Soviet Union, were characterized by government control of most aspects of life. Correct thinking and adherence with the party line was encouraged by coercive, often threatening propaganda produced by state-owned and controlled media. On a last note, it must be noted that the true communism that Marx and Engels, and later Lenin and Stalin, no longer exists as a serious political force. In fact, by 1985, at the height of the Cold War, nearly one-third of the world's population lived under communism, mostly in the Soviet Union and its Eastern European satellite republics. However, modern scholars doubt that any of these countries were ever truly communist at all, since they significantly strayed from many of the basic components of a Marxist system. Indeed, scholars argue that the failure of these Cold War governments to adhere to the true ideals of communism, combined with their trend toward left-wing authoritarianism, contributed directly to the decline of communism in the late 20th century. Today, only 5 countries, namely China, North Korea, Laos, Cuba, and Vietnam, list communism as their official form of government. They can be classified as communist only because in all of them, the central government controls all aspects of the economic and political system. However, none of them have eliminated elements of capitalism such as personal property, money, or socioeconomic class systems as required by true communist ideology.